international community has given the group, if anyone is guilty for the bloodshed that's going on, it is the international community, particularly Britain. The international community has given the greenest of green lights to the Israeli army to do what it wants. And that means the freedom to commit war crimes. You'll see Western values as they actually operate, raining down bombs on completely innocent Gazan civilians, whether they're supporters of Hamas, Fatah, whether they're civilians, they're going to die and are dying in their thousands. Where are Western values there? If there's blood on anyone's hands, it's on those who say
Israel has a right to defend itself.
Israel has the perfect right to defend itself.
Israel has a right to defend itself.
Israel must have that, does have that right to defend herself.
Israel has an absolute right to defend itself.
Israel has a right to self-defense.
This is not the whole story. It's not the defense of Israel. It is the expansion of Israel, and it is the creation of an apartheid regime even more severe than the one that happened in South Africa. Israel says it's fighting an existential war, and it has compared what Hamas did to a Holocaust. Half my family died in the Holocaust. There's no comparison. From a Palestinian perspective, you have to realize that Israel was the lords, the masters of the land. They controlled all your movements. They controlled how much you ate. They controlled who you married. It's the one that decides when to attack. This is a country used to total control over 1/2 of the population, and it lost that control. And it lost that control wildly. I'm appalled by some of the things that happened. Desperation turned into savagery, and I will use that word about what happened at Kfar Aza, or the music festival that took place where unarmed festival goers were shot like ducks. These scenes are unknown to the current generation of Israelis, and the shock this has produced, the sudden loss of confidence in its star performer, which is its army and its intelligence services, cannot be underestimated. That shock has now turned to anger. That anger has now turned to an unholy desire to kill Gazans.
I think now it's the time that we need to erase Gaza.
We gotta wipe them off the fucking map. I'm walking about every fucking flashing them like a parking lot.
Kill Palestinians, all of them.
There's a Kfar Aza happening every night in Gaza. Women and children buried under rubble. There is absolutely apocalyptic scenes going on there. The Israeli Air Force deliberately targeting blocks, individual families, and wiping them out with precision weapons. And this is happening now to one family after another. I don't think Israel, and in particular the Israeli army, can give people lectures on brutality, particularly directed at children. It happens all the time in the so-called stable peace. There were 34 children killed so far this year by soldiers in the West Bank. So there is butchery and there's barbarity on both sides. The problem is what's taking place in Gaza, which is truly apocalyptic, is done on an industrial scale. And by the time this comes out, the death toll will mount and mount. Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, the man who said that Palestinians are human animals, said Israeli forces will not be held accountable for anything they do. So all the past rules have been torn up, and Israel is going for the maximum number of Gazan casualties. And that's what the international community is allowing Israel to do. They have given Netanyahu the green light and an unlimited time to mount a ground invasion of Gaza. Gazans have tried to break out of their open-air prison before. It happened on the day in which Donald Trump's son-in-law was signing the ceremony that transferred the official American embassy to Jerusalem. On that very, very day, you had Palestinians unarmed who were gunned down demonstrating right next to the fence. They didn't break out of the fence. They were simply being shot at, rather like ducks, with the most sophisticated weapons. When that demonstration happened, Gazans learned a lesson that the next breakout that they do would have to be armed.
Hamas is ISIS.
Hamas is very, very different from ISIS. And actually, the two were at war with each other, in which there were quite a few dead bodies. There's no analytical comparison between Hamas and ISIS. And the main difference between them is that although the Hamas is an Islamist organization, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas is a resistance group dedicated to ending the occupation. And this still is a dispute and a conflict over land and not religion. Having said that, Hamas called its attack on southern Israel the Al-Aqsa flood for a reason. Al-Aqsa is being invaded and attacked all the time. Al-Aqsa isn't just their third holiest site for Islam. It's also a national symbol for Palestine. This sacred turf is actually being taken away piecemeal. And again, the West is letting them do this. This was the reason for Hamas saying enough is enough. But there were lots of other reasons as well. If you can imagine it, 16 years in an open air prison with the electricity controlled or rationed, food rationed, 60% unemployment, settler attacks on Palestinian villages protected by the army, which Israelis themselves describe as pogroms, a total impossibility of a political solution or even a national unity government. And that suited Israel absolutely fine. When they were demonstrating about democracy in Israel, no one was talking about the obvious elephant in the room, which was an apartheid regime for half of the population, the Palestinian population. Neither the left nor right were bothered about it. And that too is an ingredient into what actually happened here, because the message that was being given by Israel to the Palestinians is, you don't matter. We can do it without you. We can control you. And we've forgotten about the Palestinian state. No one is interested in it. Just days before this attack happened was the imminence of a normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And Netanyahu got up in the United Nations General Assembly, waving a map that eradicated Palestine completely and saying,
We'll build a new corridor of peace and prosperity that connects Asia through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, to Europe. This is an extraordinary change, a monumental change.
Reversing the logic of the last possibility of an agreement on a two-state solution, which is in 2002, which was called the Arab Peace Initiative. You've got Israel that's turning the screw all the time and encroaching. There are now 700,000 settlers. It's impossible to put Palestinian state, and everyone knows it. But a two-state solution is cynically the policy of all European governments and America. It's a policy that can't now possibly exist. And that is the situation that the Palestinians are facing. Now, what the Hamas attack has done is to say, I'm sorry, we're here. You cannot ignore us. Now, they've done it in a brutal way. They have definitely committed crimes against humanity. But the Palestinians, who would not necessarily support Hamas at all, would say, what the hell else do we do? And that's what's happening all over the place to a new generation of Palestinians. And this is the fundamental problem of Israel thinking that it can wipe Gaza out. It can wipe Gaza out. It can kill 10,000 people, 20,000 people. It cannot kill the Palestinian cause. Hamas is a complicated organization to describe. It has various wings. There is a faction of Hamas that controls Gaza, and there is Mohammed al-Dif, the head of the Qassam Brigades, named after a Syrian preacher who turned to resistance under the British mandate. He was killed by the British in a forest outside Jenin. What the West and Israel permanently misunderstands about the nature of Palestinian resistance was that his name and example lived on. If Israel now succeeds in eradicating the military leadership, the Qassam Brigades of Gaza, and kills them all, what do you think is going to happen to the memory that they leave behind? Yes, they can level Gaza. They can reduce the whole thing to a pile of rubble. They can kill 100,000 people, and they can say, job done. And they can even defeat Hezbollah. But what do you think is going to happen to the memory of all those dead in a new generation that will break out with even stronger force in 20 or 30 years' time? That's history. That's what's happened before. Resistance, armed resistance, has been crushed many times. It was crushed in 1948. It was crushed in 1969. It was crushed in 1973. It's been crushed regularly. And what has happened? Hamas is now much, much stronger than previous iterations of it. So there's always going to be, whoever you call them, a very strong element of Palestinians who say the only way of changing the situation is by armed resistance, until they are involved in proper negotiations and a peace deal and a calm and an exchange of prisoners. But if Israel thinks that they can wipe out Hamas and wipe out the Palestinian resistance, history tells us they are completely wrong. And all we are doing now is setting the seeds for an even more powerful round of resistance in 1 or 2 decades to come. How do we stop the violence? We stop the violence by reversing course, by realizing that the Palestinians are people, that there's always going to be resistance, whether it's Hamas, whether it's anyone else, whatever they call themselves, they are not going to be chucked off their land. There is not going to be another Nakba. They're going to stay there, whatever, and they're going to die on that land. The only way out of this incredible cul-de-sac that we've got ourselves into is to stop giving Israel the green light, is to enforce negotiations with a broadly representative Palestinian national unity government that allows Palestinians to elect their own leaders, that lifts the siege on Gaza and lifts the siege on all the other Palestinian enclaves in the West Bank, and that you start a process of sharing the land from the river to the sea between the two peoples. And this has got to be done with a realization in Israel that there is no end to this until they fundamentally reverse course. The alternative
Well, this is not the right question.
Do you support what Hamas launched on Saturday morning?
Well, this is not the right question, Louis. Really, the right
It's
question.
an important question.
No, it is not an important question because
whether you support their action or not, do you support what Hamas launched on Saturday morning?
Well, this is not the right question, Louis. Really, the right
It's
question.
an important question.
No, it is not an important question because
whether you support their action or not is an important question.
No. It is not an important question. Hamas is a group, is a militant group. You're talking with the Palestinian representative. Our position is very well known and clear.
And what is that? Do you support Hamas's actions?
And then you cannot equate. This is not about support or not support. I am here to represent my people, the Palestinian people, what they are going through. I'm not here to condemn anybody. And if anybody that needs to be condemned, it's what you call the only democracy in the Middle East, that is Israel, between parentheses, that is doing what you have just reported, targeting civilians. And this has not just happened the last 48 hours.
Hamas was just targeting Palestinians, but you won't condemn that.
I'll tell you one thing. Hamas is not the Palestinian government, okay? The Israeli government is giving orders for its organized army. So please don't draw any symmetry here. Don't equate. There is no way you can draw any symmetry. And don't equate between the occupied and the occupier. This doesn't serve justice to understand for your audience and viewers the real situation. Since Israel's establishment, it has had one military doctrine. When it fights, it goes and fights civilians, kill civilians, so they pressure the fighters. Since 1948, and go back to the record, and this has been repeated in Gaza and will continue to be repeated. So the conversation is not a blame game. I am not in the business of blaming the victim here. The real conversation is how do we stop this vicious, deadly cycle?
You just condemned Israel for killing civilians, and you won't condemn Hamas for killing civilians.
How many times you have interviewed Israeli officials, Louise? Hundreds of times. How many times Israel have committed war crimes right live on your own cameras? Do you start by asking them to condemn themselves? Have you? You don't. No, I'll answer that question. You don't. You know why I refuse to answer this question? Because I refuse the premise of it. Because at the very heart of it is misrepresentation of the whole thing. Because it's the Palestinians that are always expected to condemn themselves. I mean, come on, this is a political conflict. We have been denied our rights for a long time. So this is the wrong starting point. The right starting point is to focus on the root causes, is to try and get out of this extreme dark tunnel, as opposed to this business by BBC and the mainstream media for 75 years. You bring us here whenever there are Israelis who are killed. Did you bring me here when many Palestinians in the West Bank, more than 200 over the last few months? Do you invite me when there is such Israeli provocations in Jerusalem and elsewhere? Because what Israelis have seen, which we started by saying tragic, the last 48 hours, the Palestinians see every day for the last 50 years. You know the situation in Gaza, you've just described it. This is the biggest open-air prison. Those people, 2 million, have been taken hostage by Israel for the last 16 years. So I'm saying this just to say, Louise, perhaps this is about time we abandon this rhetoric, very dangerous, this framework, and we start giving people the real ugly truth sometimes.
What is the solution in your eyes?
International law. That's it.
What does that mean?
The equal application of international resolutions and law and legitimacy, as you did in Ukraine. Would you bring the Ukrainian ambassador here and start asking him to condemn if some of his fighters? We need to fully and equally apply the rules that were created by the League of Nations after the horrors of the Second World War. War. We need to make sure that Israel is not the exception. It has been for the last 75 years. We need to make sure that nobody is above the law. Britain is renowned, Louise, for the rule of law. I think that's the solution. Israel is an occupying force. It is responsible to provide protection for the people under its occupation. And should they commit crimes and crimes against humanity in the coming hours and weeks, it must be held accountable by the international community and the international judicial system.
Hussam Zomlot, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Thank you.
rock, dust, and sand to the rest of the world. We want finished products to leave our shores, to leave the contours of our continent. Another area relates to the use of agricultural raw materials. To use the example of leather, instead of exporting raw hides and skins to other parts of the world, we need to use our resources. We are a continent that is replete with wildlife. And what we do, yes, we have cattle. We are well endowed in cattle that produces hides and a number of other animals as well. Instead of just shipping out those raw hides, why don't we build a strong regional value chain? The hides can be processed through tanneries and then made into footwear, very expensive handbags, leather, clothing, and other products. I've heard, and I don't know anything about handbags, that sometimes handbags that are made out of the leather in our own countries then sell in Italian shops, high-end shops, for hundreds of thousands of rands, even dollars, just a handbag. And when you think about it, we are handing over a great resource so that somebody can hold it in their hand, having paid a lot of money. We want that money here. Let it be paid here. Hopefully, I'm not saying anything negative or patriarchal about handbags. Our First Lady, Monica Gengos, I hope that you're not going to bite my ear off when I leave the stage. We can work together to identify opportunities in other value chains as well, such as automotives. And this has already been mentioned in one of the reports that has come through. By working together, we can identify commercially viable projects that are consistent with our policy frameworks as two countries and that have high levels of regional content. Our industrialization program must be rooted in setting high African content targets. This is where our localization comes in. If we fail, if we settle for weak rules of origin, then we are simply facilitating the old economic model in which Africans do not advance. And I'd like to argue that Africa's time has now come, and we should never be shy to rattle the cage, to change the way things are done, and send a message to the rest of the world that we no longer want to accept the status quo as it has often been. We must therefore speed up our work on regional trade through SACU, which we need to fully examine and to see whether SACU still serves us well, or reform it in a way where it enables us, it becomes an enabler for our industrialization future. And it can be utilized for that because it's a valuable resource. It's either we do that or we do another process around it. We can do that through SADC, the tripartite free trade agreement, and of course the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. The African Continental Free Trade Area gives us an opportunity to broaden our horizons and to be more ambitious in our outlook. I therefore welcome the decision we took today in the Binational Commission to request our ministers to explore and identify areas of cooperation for the development of cross-border industrial and automotive value chains. Value chains need infrastructure, as we all know, from simple border crossing arrangements to transport corridors that facilitate trade. Regional value chains require greater cooperation on trade facilitation and logistics, and addressing non-tariff barriers that hinder the movement of goods across borders. The third area of partnership is in promoting high levels of investment in each other's economies. As we all know, South Africa, and I think indeed Namibia, are two countries that are favorable investment destination. And having had this common history, part of it having been a very ugly history, has, in dealing with that history, given us a great deal of experience, a great deal of knowledge on how we can surge ahead. Now, we both have strong regulatory frameworks, well-developed financial services sector, and favorable tax regimes, world-class infrastructure, as well as an educated workforce in both countries. I want to invite Namibian businesses who want to expand their operations, yes, to set up their operations in South Africa, and similarly to say to South African companies that you can come into Namibia and invest here. In order to boost investment, we agreed earlier today at the Binational Commission to request our ministers of trade and industry to work towards establishing a financing facility for industrial and productive development projects. Now, that is in part what our minister was also talking about. This includes cross-border value chains between Namibia and South Africa in strategic areas of our respective economy. Is in facilitating deeper private sector relations. The Business Forum is an example of the platforms we must create and build to strengthen dialogue and stimulate joint ventures. Namibian businesses must see benefits from the involvement of South African firms in Namibia, and similarly, South African businesses must also see the same. And I wish to welcome two key decisions we made, again, at the Binational Commission. As I told you, 150-something areas of agreement is a phenomenal achievement. And I'm just giving you a sprinkling of those. They are firstly to deepen cooperation, to attract the private sector investment in agreed areas of cooperation. And we can do this in a variety of ways. But what I can assure everyone here is that the two governments are fully in support of this process. They are fully behind enhancing businesses or the growth of businesses in both countries, and are fully committed to creating an environment in which private sector can invest. Secondly, to establish a South Africa-Namibia Business Council to serve as a public-private sector platform for coordinated and concerted actions. Now, this is what I would have thought you would be applauding about. Because to have discussed this at the binational, and I guess you also discussed the concept here, is a great achievement for our two countries. We haven't met since 2016. Of course, COVID interrupted, but we got busy with many other things. And now we have the opportunity to be strengthening this concept I spoke about at the business, BNC, that we are joined at the hip. Whether we like it or not, as the two countries, we are joined here. We are joined here at the hip. And so therefore, we must work together. As they say in the classics, you can choose your friends, but you cannot choose your neighbors. And in this case, we can't choose each other. We have to work together. We have to build and strengthen the partnership that there is between us. I note with appreciation the outcomes of today's business forum. Our ministers will carefully study these outcomes and see how we can use the insights of what you've been discussing here to grow our economies. We are greatly encouraged that the success of the Binational Commission is mirrored by the success of this business forum. As I look around, 85 from South Africa, 140 or so from Namibia, basically means that you have come here to draw success. You've come here to be successful business people. And the reports I've heard just smells of success. It smells of profits. It smells of great progress. So that is how we should go forward. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Tonight, Israel will begin to exact revenge.